Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kellen Mahoney. I'm the Director of Suppliers Partnership for the Environment and very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Accelerate Your Impact, how the Auto Accelerate program is helping drive decarbonization across the value chain. We're just going to take a minute or two here for some quick logistical items, and then we'll get right into the meat of today's agenda. So as we get started, I'd like to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded. A recording of the presentation will be made available to everyone within the next week, as well as a copy of the few slides we'll have here this afternoon. We have designed this to be as interactive as we can be, so we'd love to see you use the Q&A panel to ask questions of our panelists. We have lots of time available for Q&A. We'll also be putting up a few polls to collect your input and help guide our conversation as we go through this. So please do you look out for those and freely use the Q&A. Before we get started, I'd like to turn over to Bill Kenworthy with Edison Energy to get us started with a safety moment.
Thanks, Kellen. Good afternoon. Good morning to everyone. Bill Kenworthy from Edison Energy. At our firm, we like to start every meeting with a safety moment. So as we go into the spring, I'm sure many individuals, homeowners might be thinking about cleaning up the yard and doing other outside activity. Just a helpful reminder to think about digging safety with your shovels. In many of the US states, you can call 811, and you can get the local municipality to come out and mark water lines and gas lines and other things that could be hazards otherwise. So with that, back to you, Kellen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bill. And so now, to get us into today's discussion. So, for those who aren't familiar, Suppliers Partnership for the Environment is an automotive industry forum founded in 2002, really as an opportunity to bring automakers together with their suppliers to work together around shared environmental sustainability, goals and ambitions. And as we've seen, over that, 2-decade history, right, there is a strong commitment and history of leadership within the industry in terms of environmental sustainability actions, both within the manufacturing operations and extended through the supply chain. But what we're seeing here as we look out to 2025, 2030 and beyond is really a constant acceleration and amplification of that ambition, right? And we're seeing a strong emphasis from many of the members of our organization, striving to reach carbon neutrality. And as they do that, they're looking to their supply chain to take a real proactive step forward in helping them along the journey and making the strides necessary to decarbonize their businesses so that the industry can reach its carbon neutrality goals. And so today, we're really excited to bring a new partnership that's been designed to help the supply chain in this respect. As you as an OEM or as a supplier, look to meet your decarbonization targets, we want to share this as a new resource to help you in that effort. So what is the Auto Accelerate program? Well, it's a $300 million fund that's been designed specifically to deliver sustainability and decarbonization impacts to commercial and institutional markets, with a minimum of $50 million of that fund earmarked specifically to the automotive industry. It's really designed to finance projects within North America, as you see on the right side of your screen here, whether that be energy efficiency and optimization projects, or on-site renewable energy storage projects. This is really about how you can take action at your facility and access funding to help you do that. But I think the other part of this that's really exciting is bringing together a team of experts to help a company sort of walk through this in a methodical process from wherever you might be in your journey. So we have Manufacture 2030 really at the front end of this process, helping OEMs connect with their suppliers, helping suppliers build out their capacity as it relates to target setting, best practice sharing, building an action plan. Then moving to Edison Energy, coming in from the advisory side, really helping companies with their strategy, with understanding which projects are right for them and how to then go about implementing them. And then to Renew Energy Partners, really as the financing and funding arm for making all of this possible and moving those projects from design to implementation. So really excited to have the three key stakeholders in this partnership here today to talk more about what they're doing and where they see this going for the industry. So very pleased to introduce Bill Kenworthy, the Vice President of Energy Optimization with Edison Energy, Charlie Lord, Principal and Co-Founder with Renew Energy Partners, and Emily Pryor, the Chief Customer Officer for Manufacture 2030. And I think from here, we'll jump right into it. So we'd like to start off looking at, for each of your companies, where you see this going in terms of the decarbonization journey, of the automotive industry and what you're seeing from your engagement with them. So, maybe starting with you, Emily, I know Manufacture 2030 really has a long history of working on supply chain sustainability across industries, but in recent years has really become established as a strategic partner for many automakers in helping them engage their suppliers in this area. So, maybe you could speak a bit more about what M2030 is seeing in terms of that Scope 3 journey specific to the automotive industry today.
Sure, thank you, Kellen. So lovely to be presenting to you all today. I'm very much looking forward to the questions that we'll get later on in the webinar. Just to touch on and sort of deep dive into Kellen's question there. So as you say, Kellen, we've been working a lot in the automotive industry over the past few years. And really the catalyst, the driver for us starting to work in the automotive industry is that a lot of the OEMs are starting to set public targets to commit to reducing their carbon emissions, obviously in their own operations, but more importantly in their supply chain, which, not just for the automotive industry, but for other industries as well, is a real challenge. You can control your own operations and your carbon emissions, and it feels like something you can manage more easily. But when we're speaking to companies about their carbon footprint in their supply chain, this often feels a really daunting task. It's, there are thousands of suppliers. You might not have a very close business relationship with all of them. How do you influence them to drive that change in order to hit those targets that you committed to? So that was really the starting point. And from that moment, we've had a lot of very interesting conversations with some of the major OEMs, and we've been working for the last few years, particularly with Honda and Toyota and their supply base. And really the methodology around it is looking at a Scope 3 roadmap, analysing which suppliers could be good pools to start with, who are really material to the footprint of the OEMs, and then starting to work with those suppliers. Now, a lot of programs we've seen in the past have really focused on how you can use data to rate suppliers and see, basically look at historically at what the suppliers are doing and see whether you can give them a rating as to how they're performing essentially. But what we're trying to do at Manufacture 2030, which we've been really building out with the support of Honda and Toyota and all of the hundreds of automotive suppliers we work with, is about how we equip suppliers, not just with the what they could be doing to reduce, but also with the how. So just a couple of examples to give it some flavor. Some of the what that we do is that within the platform we have, there is an AI-driven project recommender that automotive suppliers can get recommendations of projects that have worked for other companies in their industries, in their geographies, and it gives them a really targeted, recommended, tailored options as to what they could pick. But sometimes the what is not enough. You also need to work on the how. There are often barriers to people being able to do things. Even if suppliers know what they should be doing, there might be financing barriers or time constraints, capacity constraints. And we also try to work on these. And this example of what we're here to talk about today, the Accelerate program with Edison and Renew, is a really exciting and classic example of this, a way of breaking down that how.
Great, thanks so much, Emily. And so maybe from there, Bill, if I can turn to you. Edison has been working with a number of industrial clients, also across industries, but as a strategic partner to many in the automotive industry specifically. What have you been seeing from your side in terms of the Scope 3 journey that you're taking with your customers?
Yeah, Kellen, Edison is pleased to partner and serve with many OEMs and some of the supplier network that they have today. Often, to this point in history, Edison has worked directly with the OEMs first on their emissions, like their Scope 2, their Scope 1, their Scope 2. And we have an advisory practice that connects them with large offsite renewable developers where they can get the sustainability attributes that help them achieve their corporate mission. But as Emily alluded to, many and all industrials start to understand that you can't achieve their net zero targets by doing financial or renewable transactions alone. You have to address not only your on-site activity, but also your supplier network, your Scope 3. And that's where we come in. So, it's a beautiful complement to the platform of Manufacture 2030, which sometimes I may call M2030. whereas they help address the how and the want from a data point of view and the specific projects that different suppliers will log into the system. When an industrial, a supplier specifically needs to understand their context, their location, they need the site to be walked to get a bespoke solution, that's where our team comes in. So we'll figure out what those facilities in those locations, is it a great market for solar? Is it a great market for storage? You have you're on your 20th year of your central plant. Do you defer maintenance? Should you do the upgrade? And then, as Emily said, this is about barriers. I mean, I think there's general agreement that efficiency measures and DER should be implemented, but galvanizing the decision makers and putting the business case to them and then never disrupting the operations, right? I mean, there's a core business to run. So we will help develop those bespoke roadmaps for clients. It could be the OEMs and their sites. It could be the suppliers. And once they have those, they can either self-perform those, and some industrials attempt to do that because typically they have very technical staff, engineers on hand. Or in other cases, when they want to go to the market and they say, I have to keep my operators on the business, can you help me find local trades and craftsmen to help implement this? Or in some cases, Edison does that as well when they really need that white glove service. But then there's also the barrier of financing. And so I think that's where Renew Energy Partners comes in. I know, Kellen, you're going to flip to Charlie. So, Charlie, I think it's a great way to connect as the industrials start to figure out what they need to do and even how. Part of that how is financing.
Yeah,
indeed.
And Charlie, please come into the conversation here. I think you have a very unique vantage point from the financing side. What are you seeing in response to Bill's comment there?
Yeah, well, first of all, hello, everybody. Great to be here. Thrilled to be partnered with Edison, with whom we've done a number of successful projects, and with Manufacturer 2030, which does such an amazing job getting people's strategies around the what and the how. What we're seeing, echoing some of what Bill and Emily said, is that customers, no matter what size, portfolio owners in industrial in industries across North America, are finding the carbon targets pushed down to the site level and captured in annual increments. It used to be, as we all know, that carbon targets were set at the 10-year range and you had some time to figure it out. But we're working with Fortune 200s that are setting annual targets. Those are publicly stated, and they're pushed down to the site level, or in the auto industry example, you're seeing more of the OEM targets now flowing through to suppliers. And the challenges are the same no matter what size your business is. You have an annual capital budget, and what we're seeing is that really clearly stated annual carbon emissions targets run smack into the capital budget, no matter how big or small the company is. And so interest in the third-party funding model is growing. We like to start with the good news on carbon, which is that almost every commercial industrial building in North America is sitting on energy efficiency opportunities and on-site clean energy opportunities that haven't been harvested, primarily because of the capital hurdle. And so just as it may feel like a challenge for businesses to begin to realize that these hurdles are being set every year, there's also new models and new partnerships like this one, funding opportunities like ours, that help you get after it now. So that how and that what at the strategic level, honed in on by Edison to the site level, you have ways of getting it done this year, and getting after those carbon emissions reductions right away.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. So now that you've all had an opportunity to meet our panelists, we'd like to get a sense of really who's in the room here today. So we're going to put up a poll to sort of assess where you are. And Emily, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce this, I will share it out to the attendees here.
Sure. Okay, so you can see here on the screen, there's a poll to do with the maturity basically for us to understand what you think about the maturity of your company related to decarbonisation. So if you can start to fill in the poll based on where you'd rate yourself. Obviously, it's a little bit subjective, but we'll watch the results come in and then see whether it's in line with what we're often seeing from other companies.
Great, and seeing lots of responses come in, we'll give this another 30 seconds. And just also to assure you, this is entirely anonymous, so don't feel concerned about answering this as honestly as you'd like to. Okay, great. So I see we've got majority that have responded. I'll give this one more second if you'd like to respond, and then share out the result. All right, so everybody should be seeing that now. Emily, what do you think of this, this spread here?
Sure. So it's very interesting. So lots of you thinking that you're in the developing stage, a handful in the lagging, and then a few outliers who think they're state of the art or best practice. So I think that's probably more or less what I expected. I guess I just have a few comments on sort of what good looks like. Obviously, I speak to both our existing clients and many other prospective customers all the time about this, where they're at in their journey, whether they've started. And especially supply chain decarbonisation is such a fast moving space that where companies were a year ago and they felt they were ahead, actually it's moved so quickly that often people are finding that they've gone from being a leader to feeling like they're a little bit behind, which is really fascinating. I think one of the things we do see is a real split between companies where they're aware that they've got targets and they actually need to hit them, and they want to try and sort of drive action at the same time as putting in place a really robust strategy. And other companies where they get a little bit stuck on the data side. So they want that, because it's such a big, complex topic, they want to crack the perfect data set and the perfect strategy first before they start getting going. And from where we sit, and I watch companies do this every day, I would advise against it, because you could spend the next 5 years trying to work out the perfect strategy and the perfect set of data, and you're then 5 years closer to your target and you haven't driven action. So I think that's I think it's a real measure of people's maturity, is what headspace they're in and whether they've realized that actually sometimes perfect is the enemy of the good and you have to get going. And I think another really interesting thing is the maturity of procurement. So I think I'm really seeing companies that are really blazing a trail and getting further ahead. It's where they don't just have a strategy to engage their suppliers, but they've actually really got to grips with what role their procurement team needs to play in order to drive supplier sustainability. It can't be something that just sits with the sustainability team. It has to, if we really want to drive change, it has to be managed by the people, by the procurement managers in your company that have conversations with suppliers every day and are really tapped in with what the suppliers need and where they're at. That's how change will really be driven, because suppliers realize that it's part of the commercial conversation and it's really important to you as a company. But also because those procurement managers can really understand the barriers that suppliers have to actually decarbonising and what can be done. So I think that's a real test of maturity, is whether procurement are involved. So yeah, there's a few thoughts from my side on what we're seeing.
Yeah, Emily, I'll pick up if I can a little bit on the notion of barriers. When Edison Energy, particularly for on-site advisory activity, some of the barriers we see, I put them twofold. One, it's to amplify what you say, that because of these mandates, which are good for the world and ultimately should be good for the business, they typically come from the board or the executive suite, the way they filter down to the operators. And this, by the way, this could be an OEM themselves trying to drive decarbonization, or any supplier yourself. I'm sure you've experienced, okay, I have this mandate, but how do I fit that into my capital budget? And how do I fit this into my operations? Like, there are choices to be made. So we've seen a best practice where when this gets launched, there's truly an investment into educating the stakeholders. There's a specific series where you gather, it's not just the chief sustainability officer sending out an email. there's planful meetings where you gathering input and setting off on that vector of decarbonization. So I offer that as a best practice. Think about installing education series, and Manufacture 2030 does that. We can help clients with that. We can help together, and we plan to, but I'd say program that in. And then the other is, once that commitment's there and the activity starts, now we're starting to talk about, equipment or new technologies. It's a blue sky problem. Oh, do I want a little bit of lighting and a little bit of compressed air? And so what we try to do, and again, a best practice for you, is when you get your advisory firms, your engineering firms coming in and developing the technical options, you probably want to build 3 to 4 pathways. And inside of those pathways, you could have common measures that get done, but some smaller ones, some quicker returns in there. And then all of those should be measured in dollars, payback relative to the financing features that Charlie's team can structure, and also in carbon, right? So I'd say educational series is a barrier that you need to think through, and then be prepared that it's a blue sky problem. And to Emily's point, it might scare decision makers, so just limit it to a few options. Kellen, I mean, you deal with suppliers, you're advocates, you're an education platform for them. What do you see as a barrier towards faster decarbonization?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So, I think I would fully agree with you. And, as we look at, really scaling this, right? I think that's the key piece of this. Even where those, the decarbonization options are technically and economically feasible, it still comes down to people, right? And so, to your point about education, I think the people can be your biggest enabler, but they can also be one of those key barriers, right? And so, looking at do those people, one, have the knowledge, have the expertise that they need, but two, even once they do, are they empowered to then go and act, right? So do they have the structure in place, to get the executive support, to give them permission to go out and do what they need to do? Do they have the buy-in from their customer, perhaps, to make some of the shifts that they need to make to really get where we need to go for those deep cuts? And I think the other part of this is really thinking from this, from an equity and diversity standpoint. So, as we look at the supply chain, there's so many small companies, right? And so, as we're looking at these big companies with big targets, they have big teams, they have lots of resources to go put at them. But as you try to scale that, down to a site level, down to a supplier level, you're looking at somebody that's probably wearing a lot of different hats. And to the earlier point, can they take their eye off the quality, ball that they have, the manufacturing ball, whatever all those other priorities are, to then go, implement, even if they have the knowledge and if they have, the funding behind it. So I think, there's a lot there. It could be a barrier, but if it's done right, it could be, a great enabler for action.
Just to add on to both what Kellen and Bill have said in terms of, I liked, Bill, your description of it could scare the decision makers. I think where we're seeing real change is where the executive team, and then filtering down through the company, people are really aware that this is going to take bold, ambitious, transformational change. And it's going to involve some difficult decisions. It might involve, for example, discontinuing suppliers who aren't moving towards a target. And that might be very easy in some sectors where you've got lots of suppliers, but in other sectors, it's going to be really difficult to discontinue suppliers. And it's going to take real sort of planning and judgment, and actually thinking completely outside the box about how you produce your products and the materials and things that go in. So I think where we're, in terms of that maturity curve, where we're seeing people, they might not have, in terms of impact, be there at the front yet, but I think they will be the front runners because they've got into the mindset that it's going to take completely transformational change rather than incremental, business as usual to get to where we need to get to.
Yeah, and I want to pick up, it's a wonderful point, and I just picking up on what Emily said. It's an interesting conundrum in a way. There's no question that the most powerful way to address this is to get a larger strategic picture, and that's what M2030 provides. That's what Edison provides. A lot of you out there have probably been approached about one slice or another. Hey, let me do your lights. Hey, let me do your HVAC. And all that does is create confusion and maybe exhaustion at the decision maker level to have to look at a different proposal every quarter related to energy efficiency or decarbonization. So strategic thinking is so powerful because it gives you a roadmap where you are now, where you need to go, all the options, as Bill said, how they lay out against each other. That again points to the two major barriers that we've seen since we launched Renew in 2013, capital and complexity. Those are the two biggies, and a strategic vision, which has the ability in some ways of simplifying the conversation around one action plan, also has the added challenge, as everybody's mentioned, of having to then pull key resources into something that seems complicated. But that's what's the beauty of a partnership like this, is that you have partners in this process that help simplify the complexity and provide trusted advice on how to go forward and in what order. And through third-party funding model like the one that Renew offers, like the ones that Renew offers, you can leap over that capital budget. So I would say the barriers have always been capital and complexity. An additional barrier has been this piecemeal approach, the ability to step back, take a strategic view, and have partners that can address capital and complexity, particularly for smaller and medium-sized firms that don't have the internal in-house and would never have the in-house teams to sort through all of these activities and options. This is where this kind of combined offering is so powerful in addressing those the two historic barriers to decarbonization.
Great, thank you. Thanks. And I think, once again, you've heard from us, in terms of what we think are some of the barriers, but we'd like to put the question back out to the audience. So I will pull this up, and Charlie, if you'd like to introduce this next poll while I do that.
Again, you've heard from us on what we've seen in the field as some of the barriers, but most helpful for all of us will be to hear from you. What are the biggest barriers to decarbonization for your company? And you can see that these range from internal to external. So we're really interested to see how across this this group you rank the barriers to decarbonizing your business. So Kellen, I'm assuming we'll wait and let people's votes come in, but really interested to see what their responses look like.
Yeah, I will give this another 10 seconds or so. I see a number of responses coming in here.
If I can, Kellen, while attendees are answering the question, I mean, all three of the firms here are, I think we consider ourselves professional services firms. We are not advocating any given solution or technology. And I point that out not so much as a sales pitch, because when the fit's right, we're all going to find each other. I want to highlight that when you find the right partner, it can unlock certain service levels that you might not think of. So we're helping an industrial where they're putting in a new central plant. Reflexively, they would have dispatched their own procurement team to go get all the pieces of equipment, the chillers and other more complicated pieces of technology. As it happens, the way we serve them is we run the RFP for them, which allows their procurement team to stay on the business. So they can still get the price discovery and the quality downstream. So this would fit, all the suppliers on this call. When you identify a solution and you say, great, I have it, maybe I found the money, but how do I even run this process? Yes, Edison, but I'd say if you find the right partner, those service levels exist in the market. So professional service firms will tend to meet you where you are. So back to you, Kellen.
Yeah, and while we add up while the poll numbers come in, I did want to, because it was relevant to the first part of our conversation, just touch on Young Kim's question about the extent of decarbonization goals and how it relates to the costs of doing so. Every case is going to be different. Any company will be able to implement deep decarbonization with third-party funding. And what we're seeing, and this is relatively recent, is we're seeing large companies actually articulate a monetary value to decarbonization. And one company that we're working with gave us $100 per metric ton figure to use in putting together the project economics. Another Fortune 200 has done projects with us where the annual service payments under our model are actually higher than the savings. And they're willing to do that to meet their annual carbon goals. So every case will be different, but we are seeing a move towards companies that are valuing decarbonization above and beyond the straightforward project economics.
Great, thanks. And everybody should be seeing, the results of this poll here, but I think it feeds back right into what you were just saying, Charlie, where, most of the attendees here are citing, the business case and the ROI as, as a big barrier to their companies. So, having the opportunity to work, with teams like this to, figure out those pieces, figure out how to quantify, the value of the full business case here. It seems to me like, providing a lot of value potentially to the suppliers in this audience. So I think from here, where we'd like to move is transitioning from some of these barriers we've been talking about to, how to move them to potential solutions. Emily, if I could, turn to you. I know, again, M2030 has been working with suppliers in the auto industry to sort of unlock, some of these barriers and help them move forward with their programs. Could you share more about, what you're doing there and how you've worked with suppliers through that journey?
Sure, yeah, okay, that would be a pleasure. So you can see on the screen in front of you a bit of a case study from some of the work we've been doing in the last couple of years with the automotive industry. This is a program that's got now well over, this case study is a few months old, so well over 600 automotive sites, mainly in North America, but some in other places in the world enrolled. And as you can see from the program, there are some real tangible changes that we're seeing with suppliers involved, which is, is incredibly exciting. So there is tangible carbon reduction that we're seeing. So within 2021, the suppliers that got involved collectively managed to reduce their carbon footprints by over 18,000 tons. And then they've also identified a lot of best practice improvement projects that they would like to start undertaking. So over 4,000 of those. Now, some of those, we know that the suppliers have said, I really want to do this, and I know it's going to really decarbonize my operations, but I need financing for it. So this, we're hoping that, the introduction of what we're here talking about today is a way that we can link suppliers and their action plans and the projects they've identified that they want to do in with this financing to help enable them and move them forwards. But you can see on the slide as well at the bottom left-hand side, this is not just about decarbonizing. Getting involved in doing these projects should have tangible commercial benefits for suppliers as well. If you save energy, you save water, yes, you save carbon, but you should also save costs. So some of the projects will, require capex and things, but lots of them should be, cost saving. So there's a real, the question that we just sort of touched on about where's that driver coming from. Of course, some of it's coming from the customers, but lots of it is coming from within the suppliers themselves, because they understand that there could be real commercial benefits to themselves if they really tighten up their response in this area. Just to sort of expand on the survey, the poll results, I think the other piece of feedback, it chimes very much with all the conversations we have all the time with suppliers, but I would add one additional point, and I know it wasn't an option on the thing, but I think one of the things we're seeing as a challenge for suppliers is fragmentation amongst their customers. So lots of the suppliers are saying to us, I've got, hundreds, if not thousands of customers, and they're all telling me to do slightly different things, to focus on slightly different things, slightly different targets, slightly different initiatives. They're asking me for data in different formats, and it's a massive, massive challenge. And I think one of the things that has been so exciting in the automotive industry in North America is that there has been some coming together, the OEMs working together with similar platforms, similar approaches, and all the work you're doing through suppliers partnership as well, Kellen, to really help bring people together, I think is instrumental, and that's definitely going to break down one of the other barriers we see.
Great, thank you, Emily. And Charlie, if I can turn to you, I know you've done similar work with large industrial customers. Maybe walk us through an example of how that works from your side.
Absolutely, thanks, Kellen. Yeah, we wanted to provide a couple case studies of what these projects can look like under a third-party funded model. Want to emphasize by pointing to two case studies that this Accelerate program and these models apply both to on-site clean energy and to energy efficiency. We typically recommend that you want to do the efficiency first, so you get you right size the energy needs, and then you can look at how to produce clean energy on site, how to also address other related issues like resilience through battery storage. So taking the energy efficiency case study, this is a large industrial in the US. We actually signed a master energy services agreement with this customer. That means once we get the contracting in place, we're able to provide funding for projects as they roll in, whether it's additional layers of efficiency projects at a particular location or adding sites as they have multiple locations. And the value of third-party funding is that you can do a deep energy retrofit. You're not limited, and this is the key to thinking about this model. You're not limited by your historic guidance around ROI or simple payback. You know, a lot of projects that are in 2.5 year simple payback get the thumbs up, and the stuff outside that doesn't. And so that limits the number of projects that are getting done for energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions. With the third-party funding model, that issue is on the funder, and we can go much deeper. So you can do building management systems, you can do retro commissioning to tune up the existing systems, but you can also do replacement of lighting. And in this case, we even went into some process efficiency. So over a couple phases, invested $2.5 million under a 10-year energy services agreement, under which we fund the upfront capital costs and the ongoing operations and maintenance. That's also a critical piece in terms of limiting complexity for the equipment that we install. And then the customer makes service payments monthly that are linked to the energy savings. So this is an example of an efficiency project. Again, no upfront payments, monitored and verified savings, a partnership to help identify all the opportunities in a strategic way, O&M covered, and then monthly service payments that are linked to verified savings. And then similarly, this is a semiconductor manufacturer who is publicly traded and very happily reported on the carbon emissions reductions in their quarterly call after we started construction. And this is an example of a site that was also driven by resilience, where this customer had interruptions through major weather events. Even going down for half an hour cost them $1 million a day, because it takes them a day to get back up through their clean rooms. So we provided on-site power generation and a battery to reduce their emissions, and they have ride-through capability now, so that when there's an outage, they don't have to worry about its effect on their business. For these on-site generation projects, again, we fund the upfront capital. We're responsible for operating and maintaining the equipment for these kinds of projects. This is slightly more complex equipment. That's a huge relief to the facilities team. We're delivering savings, and we can do these over a longer term contract of about 15 years. But hopefully keep these types of case studies in mind, because as you work with Emily and Bill and start developing strategies, this is what it looks like when it gets time to say, how might I pay for it? And actually get it done this year.
Charlie, can I ask you a question to go off script here for a
Sure.
second? Kellen,
Yeah.
I think we maybe have a minute. Renew Energy Partners, you and your team, you basically are fund managers. Is that fair? So there is capital upstream of you that wants to find a smart home, so it can get some designed returns. So your partnership with end use clients through us or others, would identify projects like this. I was wondering if you could talk about sort of that upstream fund, that this insurance money, pensions funds, I would think it's growing, and it also wants to be placed where there's decarbonization.
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, I used to say when we launched our business, there were two things that we needed. Let's keep it simple, team: buildings and money. But and when we started 8 years ago, our first investors were early carbon adopters. That is, the first wave of investors that were worried about climate change and wanted to put some of their resources to work fighting climate. Those were high net worth individuals, family offices with a mission. Our most recent capital pool is anchored by an institutional investor that's putting money to work fighting climate change. It's actually called a climate infrastructure fund. So to your point, Bill, in the last 3 years, really 24 months, you've emerged in an era where there is a lot of institutional capital looking for a home to fight climate change. And these kinds of projects are exactly where they want to be, which is good news for everybody, because it means we see competition to provide really competitive rates to customers and maximize their savings.
Perfect. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Emily, for helping paint the picture of what this could look like in practice. And I think from here, the logical next question for many of the attendees is, how do we get involved, right? And so, I believe, let's walk through the process, but I believe it would start with you, Emily, on the M2030 side. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. So many of you on the line today, we already work with or we're in touch with. And so for those of you who are already set up in the platform and are working with us, it really is a question of just following the steps on the slide. But we will be sending out follow-up guidance in the next month. So don't panic if you're still unsure at the end of this. We'll be following up and we'll tell you exactly what you need to do if you are interested in getting your hands on some of this funding. But essentially, for those of you who are working with us already, it's a question of looking at the action plans that you've already built in our platform, making sure they're up to date so that we can understand with you whether or not you're already on track to hit either your customer targets or any internal targets you've got, and what your gap to target is. And then making sure that within that action plan, you've got embedded into it any projects that you are keen to potentially explore getting financing for. So you label those projects, and we'll send screenshots via email, so it explains exactly what you need to do, but you would label them as Accelerate 2022. My team can then download the list, look at what all the suppliers are interested in getting financing for, and then we'll liaise with you to see what could be in line, which ones are potential candidates. And then it would be a question of us facilitating an introduction to Edison if you need their support in order to build that business case and scope out what would be needed and whether you'd need support, like Bill said, for implementation, or whether you're ready and you've got the capacity internally to go straight to Renew Energy and request those funds and see whether you're eligible. So that's really the process. But we will, like I said, be following up via email to make sure you really clearly understand what you need to do. I've put an email address on the bottom of the slide if you do have any questions in the meantime. But if you're someone on the line today where you're currently in discussion with us, but you're not quite working with us yet, or you haven't maybe heard from us and you're very interested in working with us and getting involved, not just in this financing, but in the wider opportunity, please do drop us a line and let us know. We will be launching campaigns to a very large group of automotive suppliers via the various different agreements we have with OEMs over the next couple of months. So you may well be hearing from us separately, not just through this program, but please do get involved if you are very keen to, and ask any questions you could in the meantime.
And I think, Emily, through your outreach, I know, Kellen, I'm sure we can count on you. We were talking about other educational series. So whether it's Carbon 101, a deeper dive on funding structures and the impacts or trade-offs, we can highlight best practices around different conservation measures or distributed energy resources. So I think, to the extent that we get feedback that this was valuable, we're ready to keep engaging you just for the purpose of educating and driving to a collective outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, just to add on to that, I know lots of the suppliers on the line today are booked in, attended a webinar we ran literally an hour ago, which was about treasure hunts and what to do and different ideas with the EPA, the US EPA, and we've got various other sessions. So there'll be ideas within those sessions of projects you could do that you could put forward for financing. So keep listening out and ask questions of us and of the Edison team if you're unsure of what sort of things could be suitable to put forward.
Great, and actually we have a poll here just to collect some of that input. So would love to hear from the audience, out of these options here, and certainly they're not limited to this, but out of these options here, if there's things that you'd like to hear from, Edison M2030 or others in future series, please do let us know. And picking up on your comment there, Emily, about EPA, I just wanted to share, we have an attendee from EPA online who's shared a few resources that might be of interest to suppliers as well. So there's some, want to make everyone aware that there's some great free resources available from the EPA and others to help suppliers do things like emissions baselining and others, and we'll be sure to put those links in some of the follow-up materials here. So from there, I think with our last 15 minutes or so, we'd like to open it up for the audience Q&A. And we've had some really great questions coming in already. If you have additional questions, please just use the Q&A box there on your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. But maybe to start off, there's a couple questions here about this pot of money and how this all works. So perhaps for Charlie, the question here is is the $300 million free funding? How is it paid back? Is this competitive with interest rates they might be getting elsewhere? Could you just talk more about how this all works from the funding side?
Yes, so the funding pool is will be delivered under either an energy services agreement or a power purchase agreement, or both. What this represents is capital that can cover the upfront capital costs of implementing a project. So it takes the project off your capital budget. You no longer have to fit it in alongside all the other priorities. So this capital pool will fund the upfront costs of the project. And then the project is structured as a service agreement or a power purchase agreement with you. Under the energy services agreement, we and our design build partner are required to measure and verify the savings under a protocol. It's used the IPMVP typically, but it's an approved protocol that is worked through and approved by you, the customer. You'll see the verified savings, and then you begin making energy services payments monthly over the contract term. So in that case study of the energy efficiency project, that company is making payments monthly over a 10-year term for the energy savings delivered. Our going-in goal in energy efficiency projects is actually that the energy savings are higher than the energy service payments. So for no upfront capital investment, a company actually sees a reduction in its operating expense. And it is just that good, I promise you. Now, I mentioned a case where the carbon emissions reductions were primary, and we're seeing more and more customers who come to us and say, as long as it's a break-even proposition to maximize my carbon, let's do everything we possibly can under this program. So we take guidance from the customer. So it is not, alas, free funding, but it is indeed structured to make it as attractive to you as possible. And it takes that upfront capital burden away and is designed, if at all possible, based on your guidance, to actually also reduce your operating budget by having savings higher than payments.
Great, thank you, Charlie. So Bill, I think this question is for you. So, question about, offsite renewables. So, where might offsite renewables fit into a program like this? And have you looked at, things like trading RECs along the supply chain and supply chain, aggregation for those projects?
Sure. What we see in the market is offsite renewables are so an offsite renewable would be you're located in Ohio, you're a supplier to one of the major OEMs, and you have that commitment to move forward and decarbonize and to lower your carbon usage off some baseline. So yes, you should do on-site work, but there are circumstances which it might make sense for you to connect with a wind developer in Iowa. Right now, in reality, those electrons never reach your plant, but it can be built and associated with you specifically so you can claim those attributes and decarbonize synthetically. There are typically credit thresholds. There are other sureties that have to be put in place. It's unfortunately like a very small facility can't hook up for 20 years. Like there's just credit checks. So it definitely applies in some cases, but you would have to pass a profile for that to be a great fit. I will tell you that the OEMs, recognizing this is a pathway to decarbonize, we and they are talking, we don't have it structured yet. Are there ways to aggregate multiple smaller suppliers together create a portfolio effect where that group can then attach to the Iowa wind farm. So that is happening. And the question about trading RECs, I mean, I think that I haven't been part of that. So renewable energy credits typically get associated with renewable generation, and those can go off and go against your carbon thresholds. That type of trading where it's different use, they can be sold to the market, but over like a bilateral, I'd say anything can be structured. So if there's an idea that you want to double click into, you can reach out to me or go to that email that Emily put on the screen, automotive@manufacturers2030, and we can come back to you.
Great, thanks, Bill. Emily, a question for you. So you mentioned your work with OEMs in this area. Can you speak to how you see this aligning with things like Honda's Green Excellence Program and other supply chain sustainability initiatives from the customer side to the supplier?
Yeah, fantastic question. Absolutely. I mean, I think it really enhances what a lot of the OEMs are trying to do, because our work with Honda and Toyota, as I touched on before, they've set targets. They want to support. I think this is really important. They want to support their suppliers to get there. It's not just setting targets in isolation and expecting the suppliers to find a way to do it. They're looking for tools and platforms and initiatives that are going to be there to help the suppliers get there. And so this is, obviously the work they do with us is really key to this, but this is another, I guess, sort of option in the suite of options that suppliers are going to be presented with. So I think it really very closely aligns. And I think understandably, there's a lot of excitement. I mean, we've already had a lot of questions since the press release that this went out, questions in from the OEMs and the suppliers that we work with in the auto sector about, what is this? How do we get hold of the financing? This is quite exciting. It should really help us move the dial forwards, etc. So I think in terms of alignment, that's very clear. And in terms of impact, well, really looking forward to seeing as we get going on this.
Bill, I know you're working, with many OEMs as well. Anything you'd like to add there from the customer demand side?
I don't want to be cliche. It depends, right? I think it depends on where each client is in their journey. I would just leave it at that. It depends on where they are, what their facility is, what their location is. And it goes back to this is a blue sky scenario, a blue sky dynamic. It's like there are many pathways, and there is some level of customization that has to happen as they think about truly activating a solution.
Right. So there's a question here about, this is intended to be a North American program. Any perspective on how this might be perceived, outside the United States, in Mexico or in Canada? And the commenter here is saying that the government in Mexico and specifically is, putting up significant obstacles to some of the programs like this. Do you see that being a roadblock for moving forward in, outside the United States?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what the barriers are. If they're regulatory and permitting barriers, there's nothing any of us can do. If the barriers are based on incentives and incentivizing fossil fuel, which is what I'm reading into the question, I may have that wrong, that one of the values of this program is that you're looking at ways of getting these projects funded regardless of whether or not you're getting support from the federal government to implement them. Again, just to emphasize, we have wide adoption of this model in Canada and have a number of projects in development up there, some slowed down by the cross-border complexities over the last couple of years everywhere, but we're getting there. And then for us, for Mexico projects, it is typically we want to be signing contracts with U.S. domiciled entities for projects in Mexico, but that's something to keep in mind. But it's not necessary. But if there's a good project, you should still put it into the system. But again, on the federal government barriers thing, I think it's context dependent. It depends what kind of barriers we're talking about. But to the extent it's about under incentivizing on-site clean energy, this is a model that can conceivably address that by simply providing the capital to get these projects done, assuming it pencils, which, you know, in many cases it will.
Great. And, you know, Charlie, maybe keeping with you, I know you've replied to this in writing, but I think it's worth, you know, the full audience hearing it. There was a question about, you know, could this apply to other sectors? Is there a larger pot of money out there? And maybe if you could just speak to that, you know, the opportunity to scale this beyond what we're talking about today.
Absolutely, yeah. This model applies across the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors. We're excited about doing a targeted initiative here in the automotive industry because of the maturity of the ecosystem. I've never seen a support system like the one provided by Kellen, your team, and Emily's to an ecosystem of companies. So it's really the right place to start. I think there's a lot of sectors that could learn from the ecosystem, because we do this model works best when there is a full sort of architecture of how to bring projects forward, and how to help people get started from education through to project identification. That having been said, technically speaking, yes, funds like ours apply across the C&I sector. I think this is the best one to start with.
Great, thank you. Looking here, another question, I think maybe for Bill. So, you know, outside of building decarbonization, you know, what about other things like logistics, transportation decarbonization? Does that fit into this program?
Yes, I think that Charlie's and Renew's fund would definitely consider the infrastructure costs related to transportation electrification if the project, you know, pencils or the economics are there. What we see and where we're helping clients, particularly around fleets, we think fleets and light to medium duty will come online first, in part because those are the vehicles available. But it brings other dimensions that have to be considered. Where are the vehicles charged? Is it a depot, or is it back at the driver's home? There's also the existing car or vehicle. What is the existing life on that? We find the total cost of ownership for electric vehicles, particularly on the light duty vehicles, is much improved versus a traditional internal combustion engine. So, you know, when we think about the barriers, the business case has as many, if not more, dimensions around transportation electrification. We look at the mileage driven, the patterns, different drivers, the intensity of the driving, the terrain, the different weather. A lot of that gets modeled ahead of time from a desktop point of view, and to make those recommendations about which markets, which vehicles, which depots. And then I will highlight that electric vehicles pull from the grid, very obvious, pull from the grid, and that can create secondary effects of creating demand charges, which is a distribution bill effect. So you want to be careful about not just electrifying too quickly, or you will create other problems too. So everything should be planned, baby steps.
I would just pick up on that really, really quickly, because I know we're up against it. But one of the things that's emerging as the first wave of EV charging projects is going in is that with the demand that each fast charger puts on the grid, there's a related very early barrier of the supply, particularly if there's in areas where there's, you know, a number of companies working to add EV charging at the same time. So part of the strategic thinking is, what kind of on-site clean energy can I add to power my EV charging? How can I link that to batteries to deal with the added demand charges that Bill's talking about? So what we've been saying at Renew is the analysis should be EV charging plus microgrid, to be really strategic and to maximize the capacity and minimize the costs.
All right. Well, this has been, you know, an excellent discussion. I see we have, you know, a number of other questions coming in that unfortunately we're not going to have, you know, time to get to today. But I really want to thank, you know, Charlie, Emily, Bill, you know, for bringing this partnership to this group, and, you know, offering this resource to the suppliers to help them in their decarbonization journey. Really, you know, again, to unlock, you know, faster and deeper decarbonization. So, you know, I know we're at the end of our time, but thank you again to everyone. We'll be getting a recording out of this webinar here in the next few days, and please do, again, you know, reach out to the team at Manufacture 2030 and the other partners here if you'd like to get involved in this program. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thank you.